Coming up right now, the newest episode from Carr, Gwyn, and Ode on Three Pagans and a Cat.
This thing of darkness, I acknowledge mine. Welcome to First Steps Shadow Work, the 31st episode of Three Pagans and a Cat. Our opening today is courtesy of 16th century bard William Shakespeare in The Tempest. You may call me Ode.
You can call me Carr. I'm Ode's father.
Merry meet. My name is Gwyn, Ode's mother. Bring in the serious face.
Yes. We are here to do another First Steps episode. This is the series where we discuss topics that are widely mentioned in the pagan community, but are not often explained in depth, or, you know, they'll get like a passing reference in a book with no further explication, and you're expected to just know what the author's talking about. So we're going to be doing shadow work, in part because something I say all the time is I think everyone should do shadow work at some point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess before we get into this, we have the maintenance stuff that we do at the beginning of an episode.
Yep.
So maintenance is we have one brand new hunter.
Yes.
Squeaky.
Squeaky.
Yep.
Who's here with us in the chat.
Yep.
Yes.
And then we have a new cat who asked to be unnamed.
But we thank you, dear
unnamed,
cat.
yep.
An anonymous cat
An
somewhere.
anonymous cat. And then we are going to convocation next week.
Yep.
Wednesday.
On
This
Wednesday.
week. Not next week. It's
Well,
this
that's
week.
true.
Yeah.
That's true. It is this
Officially
week.
now, yeah.
It's officially this week.
So
Couple
we
of
head
days.
off to convocation on Wednesday.
Yep.
We are still running a tad bit short
Yep.
of our goal.
Yep. Although we want to say thank you to everybody
Yes,
who's
everybody who's
assisted us.
donated. It's been great.
It's been great. We do still have more that we could use before we go.
Right, yes. So
The big expense is the hotel, obviously.
Yeah. Well, and the tickets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you are inclined or able to give, even a couple of bucks would be helpful.
actually, if every listener gave $1, we'd more than hit our goal.
That's true.
Lotta9 asks, what options for donations are open? Can we PayPal you funds?
I have a PayPal.
Gwyn has a PayPal, so you can email me and I can get you Gwyn's PayPal.
Yeah.
The other thing would be the Cash App, which is actually from Square. You can send money that way, or we also have a GoFundMe.
Yep.
Which I think you can pay via PayPal on GoFundMe.
Through the GoFundMe,
You
I
can
think
do
so.
PayPal through GoFundMe.
But GoFundMe does charge a
surcharge.
on there.
Yeah.
So those are ways that you can help out.
Assist
Assist, yes. Yep.
in trying to
We're really-
manage those costs.
Yeah, and we're really excited about going because Carr has scheduled all kinds of interviews for us
Yes.
to do. We're going to be obviously going to these classes, Ode and
Well,
I.
yeah, I
and
was going to
Yes.
say, you
Ode
already
and
have
I.
classes.
But we're going to share.
I have to like really knuckle down and manage my schedule to decide which interviews I'm going to be a part of versus which classes I'm going to go
Right.
to.
And
the
then, of
struggle
course-
is very real.
And we'll share all that information with you. And then, of course, we're going to do the dual podcast.
Right.
That is
Yeah,
going
with
to be
Around
fun.
Grandfather Fire, which I'm very much looking
Yep.
forward to.
Exactly.
Which is James Stovall and Saren Hogenson.
Exactly.
So if you haven't listened to Around Grandfather Fire,
Do so.
do so now so that you have some idea of what you'll be getting from them. You already know the stupidness you get from us.
Yeah. And they...
Especially if you're a hunter and have been listening
Right.
to our pre-episode banter.
Banter.
Their podcast comes out at the same time ours does.
Yes.
So
Well, on that particular podcast, yeah.
exactly,
it'll
we're
be
going
out
to
the
be,
same day.
they're going to come out the same day.
Yep.
Yeah, it should be exciting because we're going to be basically 5 people around one mic. So
Yeah.
Instead of 3, yeah.
It'll be fun.
And then also, we'll be talking with Jason Mankey about his new book, Transformative Witchcraft. We'll be talking to Witch Doctor Utu about conjuring Harriet Tubman.
And I'm reading that book right now. I
Yeah.
got to give it to you guys
Yeah,
so
so
you
we
can
can
look
read
at
it.
it. It's so good.
We'll be talking with Ken Day about shamanism, which I think is kind of cool.
Yep, he's doing a class, I believe,
Yep.
right?
Ivo Dominguez Jr., we're going to be talking about astrology. Hopefully Clifford Hartley Lowe, depending on
Right, on the circumstances of the day.
circumstances. We'll be talking about dark magic. And Emma Brand, we're going to be talking about his coven.
Oh,
And
yeah.
how that works. And then I think we'll add into that coven or no coven. You
Yeah,
know, where
yeah.
do people kind of fall in that spectrum. And then Jackie Smith from Coventry Creation.
You know, those amazing candles.
Yep. And the Witches Union, which
Yes.
we think is really
Yes,
cool.
the
It's
Witches
like
Union
a-
is such a
Witches
cool
Union.
idea.
Witches Union's basically like Boy Scouts / Girl Scouts
For witches.
For witches, yeah,
so
where you
it's
can
pretty
like
dope.
you can do work to get little badges. It's
Right,
a very
yeah.
cool
Very
idea,
Cool.
yeah.
It's a great idea.
So, and then we're still working on Tess Whitehurst, Storm Fairy Wolf, Ellen
Please, oh,
Duggan,
please.
Devin Hunter, and I'm sure Lady Dame will be on because
Probably.
it's
We've been trying to get Lady Dame on for a while.
Yeah.
Yep.
She's great. I absolutely love her.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get along with her really well. So
Yeah, and she's local. She's
She's in
from
Detroit,
Michigan,
right?
so
Yep.
The Detroit
so we've
area.
seen her around at assorted events.
Right.
Yes, we have.
Yep. Yeah, so we're stoked about doing I'm stoked about doing the interviews.
Yep.
I'll also kind of be wandering around aimlessly when I'm not doing an interview.
Right.
But it looks like Friday at this point is pretty much
booked.
My Friday is all interviews.
Yep.
Minus the fact that we're teaching a class, so
Yeah.
I'll be
Yes.
off for that. But then,
Yeah, that's right. We are teaching the Building Your Book Ultra High Speed Edition.
Ultra high speed.
All the content
in an hour and a half.
in an hour and a half, so very abbreviated content.
Right. I think that's it.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think we have a whole lot else we need to talk
No,
about.
I think that's
So,
it for right now.
yeah,
That's
we can
the
actually
major-
get into the episode.
Yes,
Yeah,
we
the
can.
content.
Yep. Oh yeah. Prep you guys. We're not doing a review this week.
Because we're horrible people, and we forgot.
We forgot to pick something, so we didn't realize until today that we didn't have a review prepared, which means, like, we can't read a book fast enough to review it for you guys, honestly,
I swear
in
we're
a
still-
day.
For those of you all who haven't seen, I put up a poll on our Facebook page. We're looking at potential t-shirt ideas, besides just the cats on there. We have Swan and Chill.
Or Don't Swan and Chill.
Or Don't Swan
Don't
and
Swan.
Chill.
Maybe I'll make two.
Guess what? It's time for reviews, just because people will be like, what the hell does that mean? And
Although
could be like,
you chose a different review.
oh, yeah, it's true. I did spell it
You
wrong.
used the, like, you went the, like, light dance routine review.
Jazz fingers.
It's time for jazz fingers, essentially, yeah.
Oh my gosh. And then I also left it open where you can add your own option. And oddly enough, the adding your own option is currently winning, which is This Is My Path, choose your own. And so I'm wondering though if, and this is a question that I'm asking out loud on the podcast rather than individually, but could there be like a witch, This Is My Path, choose your own?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
I
Druid,
like that.
This is my path.
choose your
Heathen.
own.
Yeah, I could do
heathen.
those.
I
Yeah,
like
so,
that. I like that idea.
You know, and then,
Squeaky likes the reviews,
yep.
and Agent M was surprised you liked their suggestion.
Was that the This Is My Path, choose your own? Because if so, I really did like it.
And it's winning.
Yeah.
It's winning
And
the
it's
poll.
winning by a significant
A landslide.
margin.
Yep.
Good choice.
Yeah, so-
I like that one.
Yeah, so
So that's, I mean, congratulations. You're gonna get a t-shirt
Yeah,
design.
that's
Probably
it, yeah.
a couple.
yep. And I also just threw up Ode Stone Corner on there, which I figured we could do with like a wrestling ring with the Ode character in it.
And rocks.
And rocks everywhere. I don't know. But anyway, so we're just trying to come up with different ideas
For future
shirts. Yeah.
shirt
Yep.
idea options.
Shirts, mugs. They'll go up on Redbubble. So
Right.
anything you want them on, you could get them on.
Right,
Yeah, you can
realistically.
get them on from Redbubble.
Yep. So that's it. I'm
That's
done
it,
now.
we're done.
Yep.
The first thing we should talk about with shadow work is sort of where the concept comes from. And contrary to what I think a lot of people expect, especially in the pagan community, shadow work is not an inherently magical practice. It can be used in a magical way, but the concept of the shadow and of working with the shadow actually comes from analytical psychology. It comes from Carl Jung, who was a Swiss psychiatrist. He was the founder of analytical psychology. He was a friend and student of Freud before they had a big falling out and stopped talking to each other forever.
He's the one who gave us the id and the ego.
Yeah, he originated a lot of concepts. He originated extroversion and introversion, although they're now used in a different way than he originally used them. He originated the concept of the collective unconscious.
Which a lot of people use.
He originated the concept of synchronicity. And he originated the concept of archetypal phenomenon.
Which I think is proved through a number of our mythologies and things like that.
Yeah, well...
And story writing, storytelling.
Yeah, Jung identified a bunch of archetypal figures and archetypal actions and things that showed up in stories and in mythologies and in personal development, individuation, in these cycles and patterns. And he identified these as being not just like coincidences that all humans sort of naturally gravitate to these archetypes, but as figures and inherent elements of the collective unconscious.
Right, exactly. And I do believe he came along, or at least from his work came along, the idea of self-actualization.
Jung pursued a concept called individuation, which was the idea that a human being's sort of ultimate purpose was to grow as an individual into their most whole person.
Right.
Which we sort of now, it's branched out into things like self-actualization.
Right. But it was formed from that
Right.
concept.
A lot of concepts that are very sort of pop psychology and very new agey these days, actually, when you trace their lineage back
to
originate to Carl Jung, who Jung himself he was a pantheist. He studied a lot of religions. He studied Buddhism, Taoism. He studied Catholicism, Christianity, just sort of a range. Pretty much any religion he had access to, he studied. He believed that spirituality was an important and inextricable part of individuation. So, unlike Freud, who had a very materialistic view, Jung believed that it was important to access your spirituality in order to become a more whole person. And he believed that there were some ailments that could only be cured by spirituality. For example, he believed you couldn't cure alcoholism unless you pursued spiritual progress.
So
And
that's
isn't
why
that
we
what
have AA.
AA derived from the Oxford group, and members of the Oxford group had been patients of Jung who told them, I can't cure you of this. You're gonna have to go to a religion for that.
And I think AA has proved itself over the years, and it's
been
spawned
very
a
effective,
number of effective groups. So for all manner of things.
Oh, yeah. Yep, there's NA, there's a bunch of A's.
Yep. Jung also had an interest in spiritualism and the occult.
Hey, gotta love that.
And although he attended a bunch of seances in his life. His original theory was that there were purely psychological reasons that seances worked the way they did. That people were sensing things maybe from the collective unconscious that they were just sort of interpreting as spirits.
I could see that, yeah.
Over time, his opinion changed.
To being actual spirits?
His final conclusion was, the spirit hypothesis yields better results.
Yeah, it really does. If you've ever been to a seance or to a psychic medium such as myself.
Jung was a very interesting character. He was not a flawless person. I think it's important to point that out. But he is he's very foundational to the way modern psychology works and to the way shadow work functions. Because among the many concepts he created was that of the shadow. So, Gwyn mentioned earlier the ego and the id. Those are two pieces of the self, right? Two faces of the self.
Right.
And the shadow is another face of the self.
Now, I was reading a very interesting bit of information about the shadow, or dealing with your shadow. It's on the website, Scott Jeffrey.
Okay.
The things he said was that basically the shadow self, if you want to narrow it down, is how I took it into a nutshell. It is the unexamined or ignored parts that were repressed into our unconscious, and all the unaccepted or discouraged parts of ourselves that were swept away for the first 20 years of our lives through behavior modification from parents and society.
That is broadly true, but it is not the totality of truth of the shadow, I would say. A lot of people focus on the inner child when they think about the shadow. And it's true that a lot of the things that are in the shadow, suppressed behaviors, which is mostly what the shadow is made up of, come about, are suppressed because of behavioral pressures from parents and teachers and things like that. But sometimes later in life, you can still be suppressed and suppressing elements of yourself.
Well, I think it's a human experience. I think it's something that we do. We see something in ourselves that we either
that we reject,
that we don't like. And then quite often when we reject it in ourselves, we bury it, and then we project it and see it in other people.
Yeah, the standard saying, I guess, is that what you see in other people is what you hate most about yourself.
Right, exactly. Those negative things. So if you're just upset because somebody was so rude and you think they're just such a rude, awful person, you might want to examine to see if there's some parts of yourself that, can be kind of rude.
The thing is, though, that not all elements of the shadow are inherently negative.
True.
The shadow is just the parts of yourself
That you
that are
reject.
natural to you, but which you have suppressed.
That's true.
So those can be positive traits. If you had an abusive situation and you were taught not to empathize with other people,
Right.
that has been suppressed in your personality. What I think most shadows are composed of are the things that, quote, civilized society finds objectionable. So sexuality is often
Right.
suppressed into the shadow.
Which makes a lot of sense, especially if you're coming from a religious framework where sexuality is repressed, and
Period.
looked on
Yeah.
as,
Yeah.
you know, it just is.
Any form of
any form of
sexuality. Yeah.
sexuality.
Anger is often suppressed.
Jealousy.
Jealousy is often suppressed. Expressions of sadness are suppressed.
Yeah. Oh gosh. That whole idea that men shouldn't cry. You know, little boys we're told
Boys don't cry.
boys don't cry. So just, you know, and so you've got a lot of men who just are unable to express themselves emotionally. At least I don't know if that's still as much of an issue today as it was, you know, years ago when I was growing up. But that
I
used to
suspect it comes in waves.
yeah, you know, it's that toxic masculinity idea where you have to be the big strong guy, the big strong man, and you can't show those empathetic emotions.
And the thing
luckily,
is-
I did not marry that man.
No, yeah, I cry every
Car cries very easily.
Kleenex
does.
commercial.
He's a very empathetic person.
I watched a documentary on Joan Jett today and ended up crying.
Yep,
So,
yep.
you know, it was bad.
Car watches
No, it
all
was
kinds of
good.
documentaries and they always make him cry.
Yeah, that's right. That's one of the reasons I love him.
Where the shadow becomes a problem is that because these are natural parts of yourself that can't be excised,
Right.
they can only be pushed away. They can only be pushed down and ignored. When you ignore them for long periods of time, and especially when you start to ignore a lot of things, when your shadow starts to become very, very developed, you have these unconscious desires to express the shadow. And because they are unconscious, you are necessarily unaware of them, which causes you to act in ways that are very counterproductive to your conscious desires.
Exactly.
So you do things not consciously planning to do them, in some cases not even really aware that
It's
you're
just
doing
an
them.
impulsivity that you just do a thing and you're like not even aware why you've done it.
Yeah. It's these patterns or surges in your behavior, in your emotions, sometimes in the way you format your relationships.
Like unexplained anger sometimes can
Yeah.
be something that was a repressed part of your shadow.
when you, a lot of people, I guess, are familiar with the concept of sort of bottling up their
Right.
emotions and then it just explodes. That explosion is an extreme expression of the shadow.
That's right.
Because you suppressed these emotions for so long and you haven't dealt with them. Eventually, your unconscious mind needs to deal with them.
express it.
So it just stops checking in with you.
And it just takes over, essentially.
It stops allowing you to gatekeep. And instead it just says, well, I'm going to deal with this and I don't care if you don't want to.
That's right.
Gotcha.
And it usually does this at the worst possible time.
And that can be very detrimental to yourself, to your health, to your relationships, to your work,
To every aspect
to every
of your life,
aspect
really.
of your life. Now, I have a quote, and I think it might be Jung. I didn't get down the reference.
Okay.
But it's, there is no light without shadow, no psychic wholeness without imperfection.
That is Jung, I believe, yes.
And so I think that what the shadow is about.
And we come now from a society that has very black and white thinking. That has very prevalent black and white thinking. That is very consumed with the idea of being a good person versus being a bad person. And that makes it psychologically difficult for people who are susceptible to this black and white thinking to acknowledge that there are, quote, bad parts of themselves that they will never be able to get rid of.
That's right.
They will always be part of you, right? But the good and bad labels are very subjective.
That's right.
We think of them as permanent, but ultimately they are expressions of our society. So our society has decided that expressions of sexuality are bad.
Exactly.
But expressions of sexuality are natural, and ergo they are not good or bad. They just are.
Exactly. And so that's why, though, you get people who suppress their sexual urges. Say, for instance, if you have a young man or a young woman who is attracted to the same sex, and they are being told that what they're thinking or feeling is bad, it's wrong, and they're getting this message over and over again. And so when they do act on those urges, they feel incredible guilt. And
or they act on those urges in unsafe ways. They don't practice safe sex.
Exactly. They can get hurt in some way or other. And honestly, I think that's, you've got a lot of teenagers who have to deal with this because, if they do start expressing their sexuality as a homosexual, lesbian, you have a repressive society or repressive family who is telling you, no, you are wrong. This part of you
you are bad.
You are bad.
If you do this, you are bad.
Yeah.
This is a big thing.
That's the thing.
This is the big thing. It's never this part of you is harmful or this part of you needs to be managed carefully. Like anger. Anger does need to be managed carefully.
Absolutely.
It's useful sometimes and not useful other times, right? But the message that we receive because of the black and white thinking of our society is when you are angry, you are bad.
Yeah.
Which is not true. Sometimes your anger is useful. Sometimes your anger is not useful. Learning to identify the difference between those things is important.
And
but in neither case are you a bad person for feeling anger.
And we learn how to deal with those feelings through shadow work.
Through shadow work, yes.
Okay, so I've never done shadow work.
Yes.
Actually, you sort of have. You just didn't
You didn't frame it this way.
You didn't frame it this way.
You went to therapy.
Yes.
And you did anger management stuff.
Yes.
That's functionally a kind of shadow work.
That is, it's just not done in a spiritual sense as much as what you did was done in a functional.
Well, it might have been shadow work. Here's the thing. I don't know that much about your anger management system.
That's true.
So let me describe shadow work very briefly, and then you tell me if you did shadow work.
Right.
Okay.
I think people will find out a lot of people have been doing shadow work unaware.
Yeah. The very basic steps of shadow work are identifying the shadow or the specific piece of the shadow that you are currently dealing with.
Okay.
So identifying the anger, right?
Okay, so we can put a check mark there.
Then you are accepting the shadow. So you are releasing your instinctive rejection of that shadow and acknowledging what it is and how it got there.
Okay, I can put a check mark there.
Okay.
Yep.
The last piece of shadow work is integrating the shadow, which is transforming the shadow from an enemy that is at odds with your conscious desires into an ally that supports your conscious desires.
Nope.
No?
Okay.
No.
So you continue to suppress your anger, basically.
So, yeah, in basically now, admittedly, I went to a Christian psychology thing, so I was just given tools to suppress it more.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Rather than tools to work through.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so that is not shadow work.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think, and I'm going to say there are religion-specific therapies out there that do encourage the repression.
Because they're only interested in helping you maintain that goodness.
That goodness.
Right.
That behavioral modification that is appropriate for society.
Right.
Whereas in shadow work, what we want to do is embrace who we are, acknowledge that, yes, I have this is part of me. How can I use it constructively to be a whole person?
Right.
That's shadow work.
So a shadow work anger management system would have said, this is the anger. It's part of you. It would have explored where that anger comes from. Yep. It would have kept digging deeper and deeper until
we did that part.
Okay.
So we figured out where it came from.
Found out where the anger came from. And then the most important stage of shadow work would be finding ways to productively integrate that anger into your consciousness.
Right.
So
and
that
we
you're
never
not,
went through that.
So that you're not unaware of it, so that it doesn't sneak up on you.
Right.
So that when it happens,
Recognize
you
it.
understand why it's happening and how you can use it productively.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I was basically told that anger was bad and that here were some tools to help you not get angry. Or when you get angry, to suppress it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not healthy, in my opinion. Yeah, it's puppies and kittens.
It's a Band-Aid. It's a Band-Aid on a problem that needs a surgery.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what shadow work is. Those are the basic steps of shadow work. There are a lot of ways to go through shadow work, but before we get into that, I think we should touch on who should be doing shadow work.
Right.
Because The reality of the situation is that although I do think everyone should do shadow work at some point in their life, I think it's very useful and productive and important for almost everyone because everyone has a shadow.
Right.
Not everyone is going to be necessarily in the right place.
You have to be in
do
the right
shadow
place.
work.
Because it's in the words, it's in the title, shadow work. You do have to do work in order to, and it can be a painful process.
It will be a painful. It will be a painful, messy process.
It will be a painful process.
So I have some caveats here. Some do not undertake shadow work ifs.
Yes.
So, do not undertake shadow work if you have a strong, resilient belief in evil that you are unwilling to examine. Because you will come up on things in yourself that under your existing framework you will see as evil. And if you are not able to examine that concept and accept that these are natural things and not, quote, evil things, you will have a really hard time.
And that is
moving forward.
That is particularly difficult for people who come from a rather strict religious background.
Yeah. Do not undertake serious shadow work if you have a powerful, uncontested inner critic. Because the part of you that is always telling you what your mistakes are will use everything you uncover in shadow work as ammunition
to make you feel bad,
to just hurt you.
Yep.
And that is not productive shadow work.
That's called intrusive thoughts.
Sometimes.
It can be very hurtful to yourself. So you need to have your inner critic
under control.
Under control.
So do not undertake serious shadow work if you are emotionally fragile.
Right.
And you do not have an adequate support system.
So just like with the whole, if there are certain things going on in your life, don't make major decisions. If there's been a death in the family, if you've made
moved
a
recently,
major move, if you've have a new job, wait for your life to settle down.
Yeah. So the one right under this is do not undertake serious shadow work if you are under elevated stress in general.
Any kind of elevated stress.
Any conditions in your life that create extreme amounts of stress are going to be not conducive to this process because the shadow work is also going to create stress.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm always under that. I'm always under elevated stress.
And sometimes people feel that way, and it can be a while before they can actually undertake shadow work. And you need to do it in chunks. You can't just do it all.
This is not something you just do once.
Hey, I've done it all. No, you pick one little thing and work through that.
And then the last caveat I have is do not undertake serious shadow work if you already have aggravated, unaddressed mental health issues.
That's right.
Because no matter what method you use for your shadow work, you will be digging up some very messy things that will probably interact with your mental health, whether you have good mental health or questionable mental health. And if you are already on the edge, shadow work could absolutely push you over it.
That's right.
Which does not mean that if you have mental health issues or you have stress or you have a powerful inner critic that you should never do shadow work. But it means that if you're going to do shadow work, A, you should probably start with, some relatively light shadow work. And B, you should get a professional shadow mentor or partner who will help you through this process.
Yep.
You can find people who are skilled in shadow work who will be willing to guide you through the shadow work process. And sometimes you can go to a therapist, especially a therapist who is Jungian, who is familiar with Jungian psychology. Vet your therapist and find the right one for you.
So in other words, do not go to your local Christian therapist.
No, go to,
Christian counselor.
find an analytical psychologist or someone who cognitive behavioral therapy is also good for this. But so find a therapist who's willing to work with you in the systems you're using and coordinate your shadow work with the therapist.
Yeah. And remember to be kind to yourself. Take your time.
That's the big thing. Take your time. There is no rush on this.
No.
Be kind to yourself. Know your limits. Accept that you will never be perfect and that the work never stops.
Yep.
Even if you do some really deep shadow work and you are confident you have handled this part of your shadow and you move on to other things. 6 months down the line, you may be right back here dealing with the same part of your shadow over again. This doesn't mean you failed last time. It just means you have more work to do.
And I want to read that quote again from Carl Jung. There is no light without shadow, no psychic wholeness without imperfection. And I think that's something that we really need to remember.
Any questions, Car?
Well, I'm just trying to think, when any time I might have done this. So when I came out of drug addiction in my teens, that was a very weird experience for me because I went completely cold turkey. From basically smoking pot and crack every day to nothing.
Yeah, you did the bootstrap method.
Right. So I'm not sure I don't think that equates to shadow work, but it was a process that was done very intentionally on my part.
Right. So it was a goal-driven process.
Yes, it was very, very much a goal-driven process I knew that I couldn't stay doing what I was doing in order to get to where I wanted to be. But I don't know that I would necessarily call that shadow work, because I don't know that I ever worked on the addiction part of it.
The root.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is, really addiction. I mean, obviously I still smoke cigarettes, and drink caffeine, so I still have those two addictions.
You never looked deeper into why you got addicted in the first place, or why you pursued drugs in the first place, or,
I would say my anger management therapy, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Counseling, probably.
Counseling, led me to understand where that addiction came from as well, because it was all kind of built in together. I mean, it was, it was the death of my grandfather, my parents divorcing,
right.
All
these stressors,
all these stressors, that happened all at once, that it led to, then my doing bad in school, which then led to my getting involved in drugs because I was a bad kid, right?
Yeah, and I think that you said it right there in how you described yourself. I was a bad kid.
Yep.
Well, and I had done stuff to work myself to that point.
And the thing is, you weren't a bad kid. That's the whole point of shadow work. You weren't a bad kid.
What we would have done in shadow work, I guess, we would have gone to, okay, all these things happened, and you behaved in these ways. You reacted to these things in these ways.
Right.
Those things didn't make you bad, but you were told that you were behaving in bad ways. So those things eventually became suppressed.
And I think part of it was self-perpetuating in that, all right, well, it's got me attention.
Right.
Right, which I had been lacking. So what else can I do that
will get me attention?
As bad, that will get me more attention?
Yeah.
Right.
And so I would just dive into more of that kind of stuff because I wanted
attention.
That attention, right. So obviously, for lack of a better term, being a good kid had not provided it. Right. And so acting out did, right, exactly.
And you see that so often.
Yeah, it's a very common pattern.
Very common, very typical pattern.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I think it's important, especially in shadow work.
It really ends up defining people's whole self-image.
Yes, exactly. Right. Which is why I'm saying I think it's important for people to do shadow work so that they can work through these things and realize, no, I wasn't a bad kid. I had issues that I was using and I was using my behavior to get attention.
Right.
That doesn't make you a bad kid. It makes you a hurting kid who needed some assistance.
One of the most difficult and correspondingly important parts of shadow work is that you have to be brutally honest with yourself while at the same time having endless compassion for yourself.
Yep.
And it is very difficult to balance those two things. But you do have to be able to learn, and this is a process you will learn. You have to learn how to look at yourself and see your flaws with incisive clarity. To see yourself and everything that is wrong with you. Everything in yourself that you instinctively reject, that you loathe about yourself, that you would never confess to a stranger. And you have to confess those things honestly to yourself and then still love yourself at the end of it.
So do you think there's an age that this should not be done before?
Oh, I don't think teenagers can do shadow work.
No, I think it's too stressful.
So that's what I'm saying is I wanted to...
and I think you're still too much in flux.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, for instance, the information I was reading, it was saying, this is, your formative years are really that first 20 years of your life. And
I'd say up to 25,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah, 25. So really,
40?
shadow work is really something that should be undertaken by someone in their, I think.
By an adult with an established
Yes,
psyche.
Exactly. An adult with an established psyche and who has a good support system.
Yeah, you do need a support system. You need to have a solid psychological foundation,
Yep.
right? But it still needs to be a flexible foundation.
Yep.
You need to be able to make changes to yourself without being so much in flux already that every ripple is going to destroy your mind.
Right.
You know?
Exactly.
So there's a very specific flexibility that you need, and going too flexible and too rigid in either direction will cause you problems.
And I think when you're in the middle of doing shadow, or if you start doing shadow work and you find that it is too painful, that's a time to stop and reevaluate, maybe.
There's a balance here.
Yeah, you have to know when is too much.
Yeah, it's going to be painful.
It will be
It's
painful.
going to hurt. It's going to suck. At the very, very end of shadow work, there's relief. The same way lancing a boil, there is relief at the very, very end.
Yep.
But the process is gross and painful.
Yep.
And it will continue to be gross and painful until you get to the very, very end of it. And then you're going to have to start over again with a new part of your shadow.
With a new part of your shadow. Yep.
Although I do suggest taking a break. Don't just relentlessly do shadow work forever. You will burn yourself out that way.
Exactly. Exactly.
So we've talked about the Jung version of shadow work.
Right.
Is there a magical version?
There are most shadow work that's done in paganism and in witchcraft is derived from Jungian
Jung,
shadow
right,
work.
yeah.
And
It's time for Odes! Stone! Corner!
That one was very extreme. Okay, so I'm going to be discussing rose quartz here today. For the first time in ages, I don't have a piece of rose quartz because I can't find a piece.
I think
that
I've
works
got
with
some
me.
on the altar if you want.
No, it's okay. So I'm doing rose quartz. Rose quartz is a kind of quartz. It's pale pink or rose colored, and the color in rose quartz is typically it's thought to have derived from trace amounts of titanium or iron or manganese.
Interesting.
But there were recent X-ray studies done of rose quartz, and they think it's actually microscopic dumeritite fibers.
Oh, okay.
Our understanding of rose quartz is in flux right now. There's also a rarer form of rose quartz called crystalline rose quartz, which the color in that derives from trace amounts of phosphate and aluminum. And you can tell the difference because crystalline rose quartz fades when it is exposed to sunlight.
Oh, interesting.
So if you're not sure where your rose quartz came from, don't leave it out in the sun, or it might become a piece of clear quartz. Rose quartz also sometimes contains microscopic rutile fragments, which creates what's called an asterism. An asterism is...
Sounds like a religion.
It's when...
Or a flower.
It's when light reflects perpendicular to the rutile inclusions, and it creates this sort of star-like reflected effect on the stone when it's cut cabochon, or when it's tumbled.
Right.
So you'll find them sold as star rose quartz.
Oh, okay.
You see this also in star sapphires. All the star stones.
Right, right.
That comes from microscopic rutile inclusions.
Interesting.
Yeah. I am referring to rose quartz for this episode because of some of the things we've already mentioned. It's very easy when you're doing shadow work to beat yourself up. And that is not a productive part of shadow work. Shame doesn't really have a place in shadow work.
Nope.
It's not a useful emotion here. So rose quartz, which is a very gentle and forgiving and mild-toned stone, is going to help you sort of balance your emotions. It's going to help you forgive yourself for the fuck-ups you have inevitably made. It's going to help you reduce stress, the stress that the shadow work is going to stir up to the surface. So rose quartz has often been associated with love and beauty, and I see why it has those associations. It's because it's a pink stone. And I don't disagree necessarily. But I find rose quartz, unlike a clear quartz, which has a very high and programmable tone, right? Rose quartz already knows the things it's interested in, but the things it's interested in are so mild and so gentle and almost nurturing that It's very easy to work with. You can probably convince a rose quartz to do other things, although it won't do them very well. Mm-hmm. It's also much more practical and immediate than a clear quartz. Clear quartz can be a little bit airy-fairy. Rose quartz has a little bit more of an earthy quality to it. I wouldn't say it's a grounding stone, but it does have a very almost visceral compassion to it that's going to be very useful for you when you're doing shadow work. Now, I don't have a piece of rose quartz because inexplicably I am energetically incompatible with rose quartz, and I have never found a single piece that's willing to work with me. That is not generally true of rose quartz. Rose quartz is usually very willing to work with people. So you should be able to find probably several pieces of rose quartz that will be fine for you. But if you're in my position, I can't help you. I'm sorry.
Someday, there will be a rose quartz.
And maybe not.
Yeah. There's something about me that doesn't jive
with
well
particular energy.
With rose quartz. I've never found a piece
it's like you and pendulums.
Yeah, like I mean, I can get vibe off of rose quartz. Mm-hmm. I get this very mild, forgiving tone off of rose quartz. But everyone I've ever picked up has been like, thanks, but no. Put me down, put me down, put me down. So
maybe you're just too intense.
I don't know.
And that's it for Odes Stone Corner!
You're doing this now with the image in your head of what you want the t-shirt to look like, aren't you?
Because, there were a few episodes
you can have, like, the mic drop in the middle of the thing with my image there.
Yep. And then,
There were a few episodes in the past where it wasn't quite as dynamic. All right, so now I would say let's
the magical version.
Yeah, let's go into
obviously,
how is it used in
magic?
Having a piece of rose quartz,
having a piece of rose quartz would then be a magical thing that you could do.
Sure.
When you're doing your shadow work.
The question would be, why would someone who is doing magical working want to do shadow work? It really does come down to, if you are going to be doing any kind of spell casting, any kind of raising of energy, you want to make sure that basically you dealt with some of those things in yourself that could potentially derail what it is that you're doing. At least that's how I look at it.
The other thing I would say is that it's going to be very difficult to have clarity in your intention.
Exactly.
If you don't know your own mind about why you want the thing. You see this in love magic a lot.
All the time.
So let me ask another question before you all dive into esoteric things that I somewhat kind of understand. So I do some very obviously basic divination with Ohm, but I haven't actually done shadow work. So would my Ohm readings then be inconclusive or not correct?
No.
Okay, so this is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, no. Doing shadow work isn't the only way to validate your magical working, right?
No.
It provides you with more clarity on where you're coming from.
Yeah.
So your divinations are not incorrect. They're being influenced by your unconscious in ways you're not aware of, maybe.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. Which is why in love magic it can be difficult if you haven't done shadow work and you're trying to do love magic. Your own inner demons, if you will, could cause a little chaos.
So, no, I would say that your divinations are still accurate, but you don't necessarily, you're not fully conscious of where you're pulling those interpretations from.
Right.
Or the things that are influencing your interpretations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I guess. I think I would say that I've worked through the majority of my crap in my life, which I think the two of you all can probably attest to.
You've worked through a lot of crap, yeah.
Right.
I think there's always room for
this is the thing where shadow work is...
I didn't mean you.
Apparently I suck again, so I'll work through it again.
I didn't mean you specifically. I meant people in general.
No, what I said earlier was true, is that the work never stops.
Yeah,
right.
The work never stops.
Right.
6 months after you think you've finished the work, it comes back again.
Yes, but I'm just saying, I've worked through, but never in this way.
Never in this context.
Right, in this
So
context.
it might be interesting for you at some point, if you are interested in that. Yeah. It may be interesting for you to choose a particular thing, a piece of it, and do some shadow work on it.
Well, and because the thing you mentioned was you did the acknowledging part of shadow work, but never the integrating part.
Right. You've done half the, or 3/4 of the...
Two-thirds.
Two-thirds, thank you. Math is not my friend. You've done 2/3 of the work, so you could just go back and recall that work that you've already done,
Right.
and then incorporate that third piece.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why you hear people talking about shadow work.
About the need for shadow work.
The need for shadow work when you are doing magic. When I was being trained in magic years ago, that was something that my mentor and I were working on, was shadow work.
Yeah.
Because she taught me to do magic strictly through my intention.
Yeah.
And so that became a very important part.
Having a very crystal clear intention.
Crystal clear intention. So shadow work was a part of that training.
Because otherwise, your intention could be muddied.
It could be muddied
by unconscious influences.
Unconscious influences and desires.
I know that, like, you believe you can do magic without any tools or anything, just basically your intention.
Just with the mind.
Just with the mind. You have to be trained to
Pure
do that.
power
but
of the mind.
Right. I'm just saying that's what you believe.
Yep.
And so I would think that your shadow self would have to be very in tune for that. But if you were just following a quote-unquote recipe, right?
Right.
Does your shadow self have to be as in line?
Good question. I think it probably depends on where you stand on what magic is. So if you believe that magic is just a series of steps that you undertake, and that you don't even have to necessarily believe in it for it to work, then hypothetically, like, your condition doesn't matter.
Right.
Because you're just following the rules, essentially.
Right.
And the rules are having an actual effect on the universe.
Right.
And I do think that there are people out there who just are following steps.
Yeah, who have just very formal systems.
Who have a very formal system
of non-belief based
of
magic.
non-belief based magic. Now, I personally,
alchemists, I guess I would call
Yeah.
them. Well, and there's an interesting divergence point here where, like, people will buy
spell kits.
spell candles, let's say.
Spell candles.
We'll buy a spell candle, which doesn't require you to do anything but light the damn thing, right?
Right.
And it's already been charged and
Blessed.
Then that intention's been done by somebody
someone
else.
else.
Someone else.
Right.
And then the person who buys the candle just lights the candle and, like, specifies who they want it to affect, right?
Okay,
Right.
let's put it this way. I just feel that spellcraft and magical working is more effective if it is your own intention that you're putting into things rather than just lighting a candle, doing, following the recipe of the spell, that kind of thing. That's just my own personal belief. Other traditions, other people may have a different opinion of that.
But you do require belief. Well, of course, now, there's an argument to be made that if you're doing the steps, you do believe it'll work.
Right.
Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing the steps.
And you do have to have, there has to be, I think, an element of belief, or you wouldn't be lighting the candle if you didn't believe the spell was going to
Now,
be
I
cast.
do think, under those circumstances, if you light the candle, but you don't have a sufficiently clear idea of what you want the result to be, I think that's actually the cause of a lot of spells that don't work.
Right.
Or that
go
have
wrongly.
Right, that have undesired effects. I think it's because the people who were performing the spells, who were lighting the candles, who maybe didn't 100% know what they were doing or what they wanted.
Right.
Comes back around.
Right, brings us back around full circle.
As if you are a magical practitioner or a pagan who works magic, it is useful to do shadow work so that you have more clarity.
Yeah. So you know what you actually
So you know
want.
yourself and your intention.
I agree that it's more useful to do the shadow work. I
Yes.
agree with that. My question is it possible to do magical workings without?
Oh, absolutely.
absolutely.
Okay, all right.
Oh, 100%.
Sorry, I didn't mean to imply
And
that
I
it
believe
wasn't.
the majority of people do.
Yeah,
Right.
I don't think there's a lot fewer people who do shadow work than people,
Because it's gross, messy, and unpleasant.
it's gross, messy, and
Right.
unpleasant, so people don't really do it. I
And
think
still have the right outcome.
Exactly.
yeah, exactly. Oh yeah,
yeah.
Okay,
absolutely.
all right.
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely possible.
And I didn't mean to imply that you can't do magic
Without doing shadow
that is
work,
effective without shadow work. I'm just saying you can have more clarity of thought and purpose in your mind what's going on by doing shadow work.
I think sometimes in this circumstance, you're looking at the difference between a sledgehammer and a scalpel.
Yeah.
I think because you may have less clarity without having, like, really done the work on yourself to know what you really, really genuinely down at your core want, as opposed to what you consciously want, the magic that you do gets you the result you want, but it does it in maybe a more robust and less refined way, right? When you know the very specific thing that you actually want because you've done the work to figure that out for yourself, whether you did that through shadow work or therapy or just extreme self-reflection.
Self-reflection through meditation.
Whether you've achieved nirvana, whatever, like...
Whatever you did.
When you know yourself very clearly and are therefore able to have a very, very clear idea of what you want a spell to accomplish, I think you are able to work more precisely and have less ripple effect. Does that make sense?
I don't know. I feel like this is one of those places where we can run people away from paganism because you have to do shadow work in order to...
No. In fact, I believe there are people who are not ready to do shadow work, like I said.
And again, I don't mean to imply that you can't do magic or witchcraft or anything without doing shadow work.
No.
I think there are people who have practiced magic probably the majority of their adult lives and have never done shadow work.
And the thing is, I don't even really encourage people to do shadow work because I think it'll make their magic better or whatever. I encourage people to do shadow work.
Their life better.
I encourage people to do shadow work because it helps them know themselves more. And that, I think, is sort of the highest calling of being human, is to know yourself more. Like, what else is the point of you?
And that's one of the tenets of paganism,
right?
Is Wicca and witchcraft is to know yourself.
It's one of the Hermetic principles.
Yeah,
maybe?
I believe so.
Yeah, when I encourage people to do shadow work, it's not because... I mean, here's the thing. I haven't done that much shadow work. I mean, I've done shadow work, and it's been unpleasant and messy and, gross. And especially when I was a teenager, I did shadow work wrong. So, and this is part of the reason I don't recommend doing shadow work as a teenager. The shadow work that I did as a teenager, that I didn't frame as shadow work, but that's functionally what it was that I found all the pieces of myself I didn't like, and I pulled them up like weeds from the garden of myself, and I cut them away, and I replaced them with new things. And that's not what actually heals your shadow.
No.
So I've had to go back as an adult and redo a lot of that work, looking at the things I removed that I excised from myself, that I tried to cut out completely, and say, no, those are still there. The pile of weeds I threw away has just rotted and festered, and I still have to deal with all of this. So I'm not coming from a position of superiority here.
No, me either.
I'm coming from a place of saying, like, I'm in the middle of the work, and I know it sucks, but it is important if you are in the right place to be doing it.
Right.
And if you're never in that place, that's okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to. There's no obligation. I think it will help most people. But at the end of the day, you do you.
Right.
Exactly.
Like, I can't tell you what's most important for you. I could not be a light and life person. There are a lot of people who focus, who like their focus
Everything
in life
is light and
well, they choose to focus on positive things.
Right.
And that's fine. And I hope that works for them. But it doesn't work for me.
I used to be that person that only focused on light and life and happy joys. And part of that was because of my upbringing as a Christian. But I have found over the years, and I do shadow work periodically and have done for whether I realized I was doing it or not for years, and am still in the process of I still do shadow work from time to time because, like you said, it's an ongoing process and things come back and you have to deal with...
Or you didn't examine it in enough depth the first time.
Yeah, exactly. But I feel like when, at least for myself, having at least done some shadow work in my adult life, I feel like I'm closer to that whole person.
I find that I like myself more after I've done shadow work.
Yeah, because you deal with your stuff. Right. And you accept those darker parts. And the idea is that you're like, this is all me.
Yeah.
This is all me. And it's...
You don't have to, and this is one of the dangers with shadow work, is that sometimes you'll see the flaws in yourself and you'll be like, okay, I've accepted them. And then you'll do nothing to change them or to change the behaviors that are resulting from them. That's one of the dangers of shadow work. Right. That's something you have to keep an eye on.
Because you don't want to just, it's not just excuse your,
your bad habits.
Excuse your bad habits. It's acknowledging that you have them and trying to do something constructive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did that help?
No, I don't think it's the shadow work that would scare people away.
Okay.
It's the elitism that comes from it.
I don't think elitism comes out of shadow work naturally anyway. I think if your shadow work makes you elitist, you need to do some more shadow work.
Well,
I certainly wasn't implying that or intending to imply that there was an elitism.
At least for me, it comes off that way.
Wondered why you were getting a little defensive over there.
No, it's not that I'm getting defensive. I'm just saying, like, it comes off as my spells are going to work better, my magic's going to work better, my divination's going to be better.
No. What I mean is not my work will be better than your work.
No.
What I mean is my work after I do shadow work is better than my work before I do shadow work.
Okay.
Same.
I think this is maybe something I picked up as an artist. One of the things I learned was that I couldn't compare myself to other artists. I could only compare myself to my prior work.
Right.
So it didn't occur to me to compare my magic to another person's magic.
Same. And not because I have no artistry background that I'm talking about.
But you do have music, yeah.
Well, but I'm not, I don't compare what I do magically to other people. It just...
I find that's not productive because for no other reason than everyone seems to do magic differently.
Exactly. So I compare, as Ode was saying, I compare how I do spellcraft now to how I've done spellcraft in the past, what has been effective, what has not, what I've done in myself to make things more effective.
Right.
It has to do with my own spellcraft, not anybody else.
Yeah, I think what we intended to convey was my work has gotten better between courses of shadow work.
Right.
Gotcha.
So my spells before I did shadow work on a specific issue, were less directed. After I do the shadow work on the specific issue, my spells related to that issue are more directed because I know more about what my shit is.
Right.
I don't think there's a way to objectively compare anyone's magic anyway.
No. Yeah, exactly.
The only thing I give a shit about is whether the stuff I do works when I want it to.
Exactly.
If it doesn't, I do something different.
Exactly. And if
it does, good. I write it down so I can do it again.
And I've asked other witches for assistance in spells, you know. So certainly there is no elitism going on over here.
Yeah, I can tell you that Kenya, like, if
we want money magic, we go to Kenya.
We go to Kenya, man.
I don't do my own.
We don't even ask.
No, we just go to her. She's like, hey.
Kenya's like, hey, you need money magic now, and here's something for you.
And we're like, thank you.
Yeah.
That's right. And she's with Detroit Conjure, just so you know.
Yeah,
if you wonder who we're talking about.
Kenya's great.
And
if you ever meet Kenya at an event or something,
you'll know you've met Kenya.
You'll know
you've met Kenya.
And go to her booth, and she'll probably have money magic there somewhere.
She will.
And as soon as you touch it, you'll be like, ooh, yeah, that's the shit.
That lady knows how to conjure. Let's put it that way.
So, anyway, I just have seen a lot of this shit going on.
Fair.
And so I wanted to make sure that our listeners know that this is not...
That's not what this is about.
Right.
No.
This is about your own personal work and your own personal self.
I will be honest. It sounds to me like not only do the people who are coming off as elitists need to do some shadow work, but also the people who are perceiving people who don't intend to be as elitists need to do some shadow work.
Agreed.
Sounds like everybody needs to do some shadow work.
Everybody.
But this is my refrain. Is like, I think
everybody needs
if
to do
you're in
shadow
the right place to do shadow work, maybe consider doing some shadow work. It's just gonna, I know it'll suck, but it's kind of a taking your medicine thing.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
At the end of it, you'll feel better.
Exactly. Ultimately, you'll feel better, and again, in the magical context, it'll help you in various other ways.
Sundry assorted
ways.
And the thing I think for me was you stop, when you integrate the parts of your shadow that you don't want to acknowledge, you stop being ashamed of them.
Right.
Which makes you much harder to shame for anything, honestly.
Right. Right. So
I think it just makes you a stronger person in interpersonal situations.
Well, now we can listen to Gwyn's Garden Gems.
Nice segue.
Nice. Very nice. Yeah, and today I'm actually doing an herb that was suggested to me by Pat of Arts and Craft. She asked for more information on agrimony, which is a very popular witch's herb. There are several varieties of agrimony. It can also be known as allheal and cocklebur and stickwort. What you have is your common agrimony and your woodland agrimony. Those are the two types that people use. It's been around for centuries. It's been used in cooking. It's been used, obviously in magic. It's been used for healing. It's prevalent in Britain, Europe, and North America. Mm-hmm. And in fact, there's a traditional, English rhyme about agrimony because one of the magical uses for it is for sleep. And supposedly it assists with, if you put it under your pillow, it assists with preventing bad dreams and helping you get a restful night's sleep. And this traditional English rhyme, and it's from Old English, and I've made it so I can actually read it. If it be layered under man's head, he shall sleep in as he were dead. He shall never dread awaken till from under his head it be taken. It would protect people from negative energy. It's good for dream work. It's meant to bring harmony and healing. It's excellent for breaking hexes and jinxes. It's actually popular for use against the evil eye and against slander and gossip. It has a bright, warm energy. It's a tall perennial flower that is a long stem with little yellow flowers that go up the stem. In fact, one of its other names was church steeple, and it was considered good to banish negativity or negative or evil, because it looked like a church steeple. And so back in the olden days, probably medieval England, anything associated with something holy was, would repel evil or the devil. So that's where they think possibly that association of protection and repelling negativity came from. It also is good medicinally. You can drink it as a tea for your digestive system. The flowers can be used in an infusion as a gargle or a mouthwash. The scent is very lemony and very aromatic. And it's actually considered to be, as far as we can tell, it's probably one of the safest herbs that you might have in your cupboard. You can get it powdered. You can get it chopped, the dried herb. You can get it as an essential oil, and it's in box flower essences. It's a flower essence, like a spray and drops that people use. It's very popular. Basically, because it is a perennial weed, basically. It likes full sun or shade. It likes to have well-drained soil, and you want to water it moderately. So you do want to put it in a kind of a good spot in your garden where it can get a good amount of sun.
But it can go in partial shade.
But it can go in partial.
Partial.
I can't say that word.
Partial.
You can say it.
Partial shade.
Thank you. It's not working for me today. Okay. Oh, and also in Saxon times, it was the leaves and flowers were used to stem bleeding and encourage clot formation.
That sounds familiar, yeah.
So yeah, it's a very useful herb to have. You can use it medicinally. You can use it in magic. I highly recommend it.
In modern days, I don't recommend, stuffing agrimony into an open wound.
No, you're better off probably not doing that. But apparently you can, for migraine, you can actually make a poultice and put it on your head to ease migraine tension.
Should try that with Daddy.
Yeah, absolutely. And then again, it's good. You might want to add it to a dream pillow, put it in a little charm or sachet to carry on yourself for protection, to repel negativity, that kind of thing. If you want to use it with spell candles, you can there's an essential oil, agrimony, or you can sprinkle the herb or the flowers around the candle before you light it.
Cool.
Yeah.
So that's it for Gwyn's Garden Gems.
I think he changed octaves.
I think he did.
I think it went higher. It's very nice.
It was. The other thing we want to talk about, I guess, is we want to discuss some of the techniques you can use to do shadow work.
That would be good to know.
Yeah, because it's actually not as complicated as I think some people assume it is.
Or as it sounds.
As it sounds.
It does sound. It sounds like this really
great, big, involved.
Shadow work.
Exactly.
Thanks,
That's
Claw.
why I think that's why it feels daunting to people to even consider it.
Yeah.
That's because it sounds huge.
Yeah, and there are easier and more difficult methods for doing shadow work. So the sort of really basic shadow work is essentially just journaling.
Yeah.
You take a piece of paper and a pen, or you sit down at your computer with a word processor open or whatever, however you like to do your journaling, and you pick a topic that you know is a problem for you,
Just one
at a time.
One piece that's of something that you know is something that is
That you know is in your shadow.
something that is troublesome for you.
And you essentially do free associated writing about it. until, and you can almost do like a Socratic method of just like digging deeper, like, okay, well, why do I do this? Okay, well, why do I do that to do this? Okay, well, why that? Okay, well, why that? Why that? Why that? Deeper and deeper and deeper until you get as far back as you can.
So basically, you're a 3-year-old.
Yes.
Gotcha.
You relentlessly
Ask why.
Ask why. You relentlessly ask why you do these things, why you behave these ways. You examine how you feel and the feelings that are brought up in this, and you just write about it until you run out of energy or paper.
Exactly. Now, for those of you who maybe don't like journaling, because I know there are a lot of people who don't like journaling, like Carr raising his hand across from me right now, meditation and visualization can help with this too. Just sitting quietly, or at least that has been one of the techniques that I have used.
Yes.
Is doing that same process.
Yeah, just in your head.
But
basically.
in your head. After, you take yourself to a quiet place and you bring up what is that issue, and you do the exact same process. You just do it in your imagination.
Yep.
And in your thought process rather than on paper.
And you can do that either in a very just sort of actively imagining way, or you can do that in a sort of self-hypnosis, like go into a state of trance way. If you're going to do it in a going into a state of trance way, I suggest you already be comfortable and familiar with the trance process. Like, don't try to start your trance journey with shadow work, because maybe start with something lighter and then work your way into the shadow work.
Visualization, not going into a deep trance, but just going into a state of relaxed meditation where that you can then visualize yourself in these situations.
Lorelei actually just said something in the Discord. Talk to your shadow and pin it to your feet like Peter Pan. That's actually a very constructive visualization to use. Yes.
Yep.
A lot of people do find it very useful to actually construct, or depending on how you view your soul. Like, I view my soul as having many parts, so the shadow is like one of the parts of my soul. And it's in its own way, as conscious as I am, it's just a different part of me, right? So, yeah, you can have a conversation with it if you want to, if you frame it that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, I would recommend, make it, if you do visualization, make it this place a safe space for you, some place that you can go back to more than once and just sit down and have this conversation with yourself. Basically.
Something else that people do a lot with shadow work, something that's a little more intensive sometimes, is called memory regression.
That you might want to do with a qualified professional.
You want to do that with a partner, with someone who's very skilled with shadow work, with a therapist, with a hypnotist, with someone like that. But memory regression is where you actively remember a traumatic period in your life to work through the emotions that it created in you.
Which is why we don't recommend you doing that by yourself or with somebody who doesn't know what they're doing.
Yeah. And because it's one of the more difficult techniques, it's one that we recommend reserving until you are in an otherwise very stable position.
Because it will dredge up other things. And that's the thing you'll discover as you work on
the shadow work reveals new shadow work you need to do.
As you work on one issue, you'll discover something else.
And those, you don't try to do them all at the same time. Just write them down to deal with later.
Put it in a basket and work with it later.
Yep. Something else that I've seen people do is reenactment or performance. So they'll do sort of these symbolic, cathartic performances of either situations that were difficult for them, or they'll act out what they know are their bad behaviors. They'll act those out and perform the experience of them to sort of call up those emotions, because it's easier to do shadow work if you're feeling the problem. And if you're having a hard time feeling the problem, things like reenactment, things like cathartic performance are ways that you can bring that feeling closer to the front so you can deal with it.
So like Shadow Work the musical.
Yes, basically.
Okay.
I'm wondering if, because I once attended a Zaar, Z-A-A-R, which is an Egyptian dance experience, basically, where you essentially do a short version of shadow work. It's a form of ecstatic dance. And what it is meant to do is call up your inner demons and
so that you can wrestle with them.
So that you can wrestle and release them.
Yeah.
So you could, if that is something like in instead of like if you didn't want to act it out.
Yeah, you could do
what you
ecstatic
could
dance.
do is, focus on the one thing that you've chosen and do some, bring it up through ecstatic dance and deal with it that way.
Through drumming, and there are a lot of more active things you can do. Yeah,
all kinds of things.
And I find even that, so, like, right now there's a show on Netflix called I Am a Killer. Mm-hmm. And it's a series of interviews with death row inmates and the people who are affected by their crimes, right? And I found it very interesting because the show presents them in a very empathic way, and you're forced to sort of address them as people instead of as concepts. So and the things that drive people who commit crimes are the things that are in your shadow somewhere being suppressed.
Yep.
And how a lot of people end up committing crimes is that their shadow explodes and a crime happens.
Right.
And with some of these people, you're dealing with people who have...
They have systemic problems, yes. But those problems ultimately come from suppressed impulses in the shadow that weren't dealt with.
Right.
So I find it productive to watch these interviews and try to understand how these people got to this place and approach them with empathy and compassion and then look back at myself, at my own shadow, and see the reflection of those same things in myself that are also suppressed.
Right.
Because obviously, I don't want to do crimes.
Right, exactly.
But my shadow sure would like to do crimes.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's shadow would like to do at least one crime.
Oh, yeah. Exactly.
So I find that useful as sort of a gateway to looking at sort of the really, really ugly stuff in your shadow, is to look at somebody else's ugly stuff.
Yeah.
And empathize with that person's ugly stuff.
Right.
See them as a person, and then look back at yourself.
Right. And I think that's the important part, is having empathy and seeing them as a person.
Something else that you can do is you can use, like, if you don't even know where to start, you can use a divination system. This can be as simple as, like, asking your tarot deck, like, okay, what's the thing I need to focus on?
Pendulum is good for that, too, because you can,
you have to ask yes/no questions with that.
Yeah, but I mean, if you have some ideas, if you have a list of a couple of things that you should be working on, you could very easily take a pendulum if you do pendulum work
and say, pick one.
Say, which one of these. And you don't have to do it by asking the question. You could write them down on a piece of paper in like a rainbow shape.
Sure.
And
see which one it goes
to. With like little pie sections, and see which one it goes to.
Yeah. If you have like a bunch of problems you need to address, you could ask the pendulum to prioritize them for you.
Yeah, prioritize.
If you don't know what to start with at all, pull cards out of the deck and see what comes up.
I think you can do the same thing with Owen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. With runes, with any of the
divination decks. And sometimes that's useful because, I believe that, often when we are using, not always, obviously, but often when we are using divination, we are talking to our higher self. We're our unconscious.
Would that be the superego, actually?
I believe so, yeah.
Rather than the unconscious?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
I don't know.
So, but anyway, you're talking to a part of yourself. Right. So that's why it can be useful to use divination techniques to guide you onto where you should be focusing.
And because your shadow is necessarily an unconscious part of you, a part you are not conscious of,
right?
Sometimes you do need something to
you just don't know.
Clue you into what the problem is.
Right. You know that there's something. You can, often people will know instinctively that there's something wrong. Something that's affecting your behavior, you're not, or your feelings, but you're not sure what it is or how to deal with it. Right. And so divination would be a great way to ferret that out.
Yeah, to narrow it down. Lorelei is saying that art journaling, scrapbooking, visual journals and stuff are also good. I agree. Especially if you're not into, like, writing things down. You can do sketching and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Any kind of form like that.
And also just art therapy is good.
Yep.
But so the only other thing I wanted to mention is that when you're doing shadow work, especially if you're doing like a series of shadow work, pay closer attention to your dreams than you usually do because you're going to be stirring up a lot of stuff and your unconscious will be processing some of it while you dream.
In fact, it would be good for you to keep a little notebook beside you, beside your bed, so that when you wake up, you can write down immediately what you've dreamed and then you can analyze it later.
Yep.
So, hey.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are the
basic, things that
the
you
big
can do. And there are books out there. There's one that I'm currently reading that's called Dealing with Your Shadow. It's available on Amazon. There are some, I believe in the Dark Goddess workbook. I don't remember who the author is. She has some shadow work in there.
You can find shadow work stuff
Yeah.
sort of sprinkled around
Yeah,
the
you
internet.
can sprinkle it around.
For free, even.
Yes, exactly.
That won't require you to buy a book.
Exactly. And look up Scott Jeffrey, because it was a whole, basically a paper that was put online on dealing with repressed emotions
Yeah.
and doing shadow work. So those are some options.
Yep.
But now I think it's time for Car's Feast Table.
Car's Feast Table. There it goes.
Makes him laugh every time.
The snort.
And the cough.
Sorry. So I decided, since I hadn't done any actual shadow work, that in the feast table today, we would have chocolate shadow cake.
Nice. Chocolate is always good.
And Cara has shown me a photo, and it looks extremely good.
And as we all Harry Potter fans know, chocolate is good for defense against the dark arts, right? Does that include shadow work?
Who knows? I don't think JK was really thinking about it.
I know chocolate has always been good therapy for me.
So this is a chocolate cake
Okay.
with a white frosting and then a chocolate high gloss glazed ganache poured over top.
Oh God,
It looks
that looks
very
amazing.
good.
It really does. It looks so good.
So cake is basically cake. Make a cake.
Get a box
Bake
cake.
a chocolate
Bake
cake.
a chocolate cake. Make it easy on
You
yourself.
could bake a chocolate cake.
totally
You could do a box
You
cake.
could do a box cake, but doggone it, I have a recipe that has a cake in it. So make the damn cake. It always tastes better if you make it yourself. Unless it's my grandmother's chocolate cake.
You say that,
do not go
But
there.
I suspect most box cakes are better than whatever I would come up with.
All you have to do is follow this wonderful recipe.
I'm going to follow that wonderful recipe and we shall see.
So it's 3/4 of a cup of butter, 1 3/4 cups of sugar.
Wow.
Might be a little sweet. 2 cups of cake flour, sifted. 2/3 of a cup of unsweetened cocoa powder.
Okay.
A teaspoon of baking soda, 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, a cup and 2 tablespoons of buttermilk
Ooh.
at room temperature. See why I'm saying make it?
Buttermilk does add a lot to a chocolate cake recipe.
3 large eggs and a teaspoon of vanilla extract.
That does sound good.
Mix that all up, bake it. While it's baking, you're going to make this
He
frosting.
says it like it's so
Mix
easy.
that all up and
Mix it
bake
all
it.
up.
That's pretty much the cake. You mix it all up and you bake it, and it comes out as a cake.
Hopefully.
While that's baking, you're going to make your white frosting, which is 2 large eggs, just the whites, no yolks, 1.5 cups of sugar, 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, 1/3 cup of water, 2 teaspoons of light corn syrup,
Interesting.
and 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. You're going to mix that all up and set it to the side.
Isn't that the same amount of sugar that was in the cake?
No, it's less
Okay.
by 1/4 cup.
Oh boy.
It's a
Yeah.
big cake.
Okay.
It's a lot of sugar. Just deal with it, people. There's butter and sugar galore
It
in this
is
thing.
buttermilk.
16 servings in this
Oh
cake.
wow,
So
that's
it's
a big cake.
Yes.
That's a big
So,
cake. Okay.
I don't think I have
It's
pans
for a
big
party.
enough
It's
that.
for a party.
Right. It's
You
for
could
your
just make-
shadow work party.
Hey.
Oh.
Maybe just make a 4-layer cake.
So it is layered.
Okay.
After you take your cake out and it's cooled, you're going to want to ice it with this white icing. And then you're going to make the glaze, which is really simple.
Okay.
It is 2 ounces of semi-sweet baking chocolate
Okay.
and 2 teaspoons of shortening.
And I have been watching the Food Network a lot over the years. And you want to make sure your chocolate doesn't get too hot so
Yep.
that you get that nice gloss.
Glaze, yeah. You want to make sure that it doesn't get too hot, so you're going to nuke this mixture 30 seconds at a time. Mixing it after every 30 seconds
So don't cheat.
until it's
Just put it in for
until
2
it's
minutes or
smooth.
whatever.
Then you're going to let it cool slightly and set it aside. And then you're going to, once that cake is frosted and everything, you got this glaze, you're going to pour it over the top of the frosting.
Of the cake.
Right? And it's going to run down the sides.
Yeah,
it's
that is
supposed
really
to
cool.
run down the sides. You're not frosting over the frosting.
It looks
You're letting it run down the
Yep.
sides.
It
In
looks
these
so
long
effective.
rivulets.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's really
it looks really
Tendrils
nice.
almost.
Yeah.
octopusy kind of looking things. Anyway, and then if you have taken the time and done it correctly, you will have a high gloss glaze.
If you don't, you'll have burned chocolate.
That's right.
You don't want us to have burnt chocolate, but it
it'll
won't
be
have that
dull.
glaze.
Yeah.
It'll be
dull. So you want to make sure that you spend that stopping every 30 seconds.
Yeah,
yes,
it won't
it's a
be
process,
shiny.
but you want it to be shiny because the process of this is it's a mirror that doesn't reflect.
It's very cool.
Right?
I've done it before. It's worth the time and the effort. It really is.
Hence the reason why it's a shadow cake.
Yep.
Right.
I gotcha.
And so we will post that recipe from the Spruce Eats
Cool.
on
Nice.
on
the website.
on the blog.
On the blog,
blog.
which you can find on 3pagansandacat.com.
You can indeed.
Yeah, I guess we are kind of at the end here.
Yeah, I think we've talked about as much as we can from all the various
Unless Car had any
aspects.
more questions.
No, I think what I'd like to say right now is we'd like to thank our tiger Akaneko for the Grand Rapids Kimono Club.
Absolutely.
And the Grand Rapids Kimono Club, you ask, what is it? Were you asking that?
What is
Yes,
it?
yes, I was asking
What
that.
is the Grand Rapids Kimono Club?
So, kimono, as you may or may not have known,
Although you probably do if you've been listening for a while.
Yep.
while mostly in the modern period, kimono is worn by women and is often only in formal occasions. Historically, kimono was worn by both men and women. And had all manners and purposes for it, including an intricate set of rules and styles which would advertise the wearer's social position, their age, their gender, their marital status, their personality, their intended activity, all kinds of stuff. It's really cool. So if you're in the West Michigan area, you can check out the Grand Rapids Kimono Club on Facebook. Owning a kimono is not required for admission to the group.
Nope.
Akaneko has said that many times. And then they have a bunch of really cool stuff. So get out there, jump into this kimono club and see what's going on.
And they
Learn
do
some cool
activities
stuff.
and stuff.
Yeah, they
do.
have meetups and they're
It's a very active group.
Yeah,
Yes.
there are a couple of other kimono groups from the Midwest that they sort of meet up with sometimes. It's a really cool little group.
Yep.
Yeah.
What about Crystal?
Oh, we just want to talk about the tea?
Sure, yeah, we can just talk about the tea.
We just had the tea the other day. Crystal
I actually had
Potinen,
tea yesterday.
who is
Yeah.
also a tiger, correct?
Yes.
Crystal
Yes.
Potinen.
Yep.
And her name, it's the
her,
name
her
of
name we're maybe pronouncing correctly.
maybe pronounced it correctly.
But her
she-
business is Apothecary Tea.
And they are amazing teas, which we have tried ourselves. They're delicious. They are good for you.
They're extremely pretty.
And they're extremely pretty. You can just look into that bag and just admire the beautiful colors of the herbs and the flowers.
We have
and
the elder flower tea,
It's
and
pretty.
it's blue and beautiful, and I love it.
It even smells good, like, just even before you've made
Yeah,
tea.
before you
like,
steep
in
it, just opening the bag, it's just like,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Smells so good.
And she has a number of different blends.
Oh, yeah.
There's the elderberry. There is the
Herbalist Shield.
The Herbalist Shield, which is if you need to boost your
your health.
immune system.
She's got a sangria one that tastes like citrus.
It is very good.
She's got a chai tea that looks very nice. I haven't tried it yet, but it does look very good.
And you can get it. I believe there's various sizes that you can order.
And I would say if you're going to go on to the website and order now, the Star-Crossed Lovers Collection is what this
Yeah.
we're in
Oh,
the
is
month
that
of
being
February.
featured?
Yep.
Yes. So get on there and get that. It actually looks absolutely amazing. You get Romeo, Juliet, Faded, or the Crossed Lover Sampler Pack.
That does look nice.
And the sampler pack is only $20, so
Yeah, that's hard to argue with.
Yep.
And if you get Crystal's tea, you know you're getting tea that has been prepared by someone who really takes care and pride in their work
Yep.
and in their product.
That's apothecaryteastore.com.
That's
that is
right.
exactly it. Alrighty.
Now I think we're done.
Now I think
we're done. All
You're
right,
gonna
so
do the thing. Do the thing.
Do the out stuff.
Get yourself prepared.
you can find us on
Okay, that was dramatic.
You can find us on, he says, and then immediately cracks himself up so that he can't deliver.
All right, so you can find us at 3pagansandacat.com. That's the number 3, pagansandacat.com. You can also find us on Facebook at 3PAAC. That's 3-pack. That's the number 3, PAAC. So on Twitter, you can find us at 3_pagans. You could find us at Google+, but it won't exist in April, so who the hell cares?
So why bother?
And you can find us on YouTube.
Yep, YouTube channel, which I cannot read you, but you can find all of that information.
Just
We also
by
have a
search.
Patreon page for Patreon. We have a Redbubble where you can buy T-shirts and mugs and all that
hopefully
kind of
journal
stuff.
designs.
Yeah.
New designs, journals on
coming
there.
at some point.
All
Hey,
kinds of stuff. So
Buy a journal for your shadow.
There you go.
Yeah.
A journal for your shadow work.
that's it. I think we're done.
Yeah, I think we are.
Okay. Thank you. Goodbye.
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 You've been listening to Three Pagans and a Cat. Find out more information at www.threepagansandacat.com.